I'd like to call the Finance, Administration, and Economic Development Committee meeting to order. This is Monday, August 21st, 2023. If everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public notification of this meeting has been published, posted, and distributed in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. I'd like to move for someone to make a motion to approve our agenda today.
So moved.
All right, thank you. Is there any objection to the agenda or any discussion? Seeing no discussion?
Sure.
Seeing no discussion or objection, the agenda has been approved. I'd then like to ask for someone to make a motion to approve the minutes of May 8th, 2023, May 15th, 2023, and June 19th, 2023.
I'll make the motion.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dabernick. And a second? Mr. McCallum made the second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to us approving those? And seeing no objection, they all will be approved. Move on to our citizens' comment. I don't think we've had anyone sign up online. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address our committee? Seeing no one, we will then move on then to number 7 on our agenda, which is division update from Assistant County Administrator, Mr. Dale Butts. Mr. Butts, thank you for being here today. We appreciate you coming forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of brief points about the Finance Division, a couple of things that are going on. The Assessor's Office is on target for the September 1st countywide mail out of assessment notices. Ebony Sanders has been making the rounds this summer throughout the county to educate our citizens on the process of reassessment and what to expect. And thank you all actually for holding meetings in your districts and giving her the opportunity to speak. Beginning October 3rd, personnel from her office will be available at library locations throughout the county to assist the public in the appeals process as well as answer any related questions. So stay tuned for a press release outlining dates and times for those events. And incidentally, a taxpayer will have 90 days from the mailing of those assessment notices to file an appeal. One thing that several council members have requested is a monthly financial report showing departmental expenditures. That is coming starting in September, and the plan is to present those at the Finance Committee meetings. A reminder, however, that anyone can currently view the county's financial reports and the spending portal by going to the county website and clicking Transparency, where you can find links to both of those reports. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. Butts?
I just have
Ms.
one
Dabernick,
comment. I like what's on the website, but I didn't pay attention the first time. You gotta watch it goes to 2023. You gotta flip it to 2024, so you're in the current fiscal year,
That's right.
because it just defaults to 23.
I found that you have to play with it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it is there.
I'd just like to thank your department for some help with a constituent that I had that's been going on for a little while, but I think y'all solved it.
I hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that because you gave me some really fast service with that lady who had the tax issue. And I talked to her and everything's calmed down. And now we just have to address the issue of the refund committee and try and find out, if I can, how that circles around so that the overpayment can be refunded. So thanks very much
Absolutely.
for that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Butts, thank you very much. All right, let's move on to our next agenda item. This is our agenda item number 8. And is this something we should be handling the next two things together or keep them separate just for vote purposes? Any recommendation on that?
Yes, you need to keep them separate for vote purposes.
All right, so let's go ahead with recommend of approval of an ordinance authorizing the Hilton Head #1 Public Service District in South Carolina to issue not exceeding $23 million of general obligation bonds and providing for other matters related thereto. I think we have the firm of Pope Flynn. If you can go tell us your name. I know I've mentioned before.
Yep, Sarah Weathers.
Sarah Webb, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being here, and again, the floor is yours, so go ahead.
Yep, happy to be here. The Public Service District, we have some representatives here who will also go through a presentation with you, as well as the chairman. They are seeking to issue general obligation bonds. This process, I know the council is very familiar with. We just finished doing it for Fripp Island. These are general obligation bonds that will be issued, secured by the taxes levied within the district. The commission of the district is elected, and therefore, accountable, to their constituents as far as taxes go and tax rates and those sort of things. The Public Service District has a history of really responsible fiscal spending and really reasonable projects. They're resourceful. We were just discussing some grant money that they have received, and they're really able to stretch those dollars. A lot of this also is for emergency preparedness and kind of strengthening their resiliency. I'm going to let Pete, the executive director, speak to the projects, but if you have any questions as far as the process goes, I'm happy to speak to that. We are looking for a recommendation on these two separate items today. After that, when it goes to full council, the first thing will be adopting a resolution calling for a public hearing. And then first reading of an ordinance that will require 3 total readings and a public hearing on the matter. After that, it will then get kicked back to the Public Service District to work through the remaining items.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the committee for having us. I'm Pete Nardi, the general manager of Hilton Head PSD. Our group with us today includes our chair, Frank Turano, one of our newer commissioners, Andy Paterno, and also our finance manager, Amy Graybill. So I kind of get the fun part. I'll run through with you what we actually intend to do with this funding and what the situation is. So the PSD, just a refresher, it's really performing 6 different key functions there on the island. It's tap water production, it's water treatment. We do treatment of brackish groundwater via reverse osmosis method, a plant we have on the north end, Jenkins Island. Then, of course, it's a water distribution utility, all the towers and meters and valves and mains and all that. We're also the sanitary sewer utility, so sanitary sewer collection system, a lot of sewer lift stations in our service area, no topography to move wastewater around, we have to pump it everywhere. Wastewater treatment, our plant there off of Oak Park Drive is a 6.3 million gallon a day capacity wastewater treatment plant. And the really neat thing we do on Hilton Head, and we've done for decades, is it's a 100% recycled water program. So all of the treated wastewater in the plant is either sent into pre-existing wetland habitats as part of a wetland nourishment program, wetland maintenance program, or it is commoditized, resold to Gulf for their irrigation purposes, so that Gulf on the island is not using our potable water supply. They're using the reclaimed water to irrigate. And as Sarah mentioned, the PSD, it's a special purpose district under Carolina law, and it's governed by 7-member Board of Commissioners. They're elected general election cycle, and the voting districts that they're elected from are comprised just the PSD service area. But they are a municipal election you'd see right after a town council on the ballot. So the key thing that's going on, the PSD applied for and was the recipient of a $10 million grant from the South Carolina Infrastructure Investment Program, the SCIP, which really is AKA the ARPA monies allocated to the state, which the state then set aside for water, wastewater, stormwater. The General Assembly put it all into a competitive grant program. The utilities had to apply and be successful in the competitive grant program. Our projects are really 2 key things. One is the expansion and really the build out of our reverse osmosis drinking water treatment facility there on Jenkins Island. And then the second thing is the construction of a second aquifer storage and recovery well, ASR, we call the technique. We have one of these already. We'd like to build a second one and bracket the service area with this large-scale supply. It's key for not only meeting our day-to-day demands, but it's key for our resiliency and our hurricane recovery there. So in total, the projects for our application purpose were estimated at $17 million. So $10 million grant, and looking at, at least we were anticipating a $7 million local match that would have to come into play to actually complete these projects. That's all part of the competitiveness of the grant application. The state was really looking for local match, local leverage, and showing what you were going to put on the table locally to make these long-term projects happen. The key with these is they are long-term water supply projects, really for the future of the island. They benefit the entirety of the service area. They're not neighborhood projects. They are for the entirety of the system. As Sarah touched on, a lot of needs, but really meeting peak demand for tap water. We still are facing saltwater intrusion into the freshwater part of the aquifer at Hilton Head. So we face the loss of the freshwater wells that we're still clinging to. So doing something like expanding the reverse osmosis plant is key for replacing the lost supply. And then, as we mentioned, it's key for our hurricane resiliency, our recovery, speeding recovery from storms. The reverse osmosis technique is really important for protecting the public water supply from PFAS contamination. That's something that you've probably been hearing about lately in the news. It's forever chemicals that can get into various water supplies, particularly like surface water supplies. It makes the groundwater supply very key, and then an extra layer is that reverse osmosis treatment. It's right now the leading barrier technology against PFAS contamination. And then a lot of this too is the more that the island can handle its own demands, especially peak season, it lessens our demand on the mainland system, on the Beaufort Jasper Water and Sewer Utility, from which we buy water on a wholesale basis. And as you all know, they're facing a lot of new demand and new growth. RO plant, if any of you are ever in the area, would love to give you a visit to it, but it's membrane filtration of brackish groundwater. Our plant right now treats 4 million gallons a day. It produces 4 million gallons a day of drinking water. And this project will expand it, build it out to 6 million gallons a day, which was its envisioned capacity when the plant was launched back in '09. And then the other thing we like to do there, believe it or not, this plant has no emergency generator on it. So part of this project is to also add emergency generator at the plant. To do the expansion, we have to construct a fourth raw water production well into the brackish aquifer to yield the water that will get us this extra 2 million gallons a day of capacity in the plant. The town of Hilton Head Island is working very well with us on this. It's looking like we'll actually place the new well, on town-owned property south side of William Hilton Parkway, the old Welcome Center parcel, it's called, next to the Crazy Crowd. So the aquifer storage and recovery well, the photo is our current well. It's located inside HHP at our Royal James facility. So we're looking to build a second one of these, again, working with the town of Hilton Head Island and placing it on land that they own called the Ashmore Tract. Pretty big tract of land that's actually adjacent to the PSD's, our fence line at our wastewater treatment plant. So kind of just a project where we're going to push our fence line a little bit, drill this new well, and it creates a tremendous amount of storage for us, both to meet peaks and to recover from disasters. What ASR really, this is a nice slide, I think, shows the comparison. So you're using it to store already treated drinking water down in the brackish part of the aquifer. And you build a bubble of the treated drinking water using the aquifer itself as your storage zone. What's so impressive about it is, like the photo says, you build a big concrete ground storage tank, well, you can put about 2 million gallons in it. With the ASR well, you can put 260 million gallons in it. And then what it's doing is it's yielding about 2 million gallons a day of supply during the summer months. But our current ASR well was really, really critical, for example, in our recovery from Hurricane Matthew, because you're able to have that kind of large-scale supply waiting for you underground after the loss of power to re-energize everything and put the water back in the distribution system, repressurize the water distribution system, which is key for the recovery. So in addition to the SCIP projects, the potential funding here could also be used for a couple of key things. One is we are facing the relocation of our large-scale drinking water transmission pipeline that connects us to the mainland. We are told by the DOT it will have to be relocated as part of the US 278 corridor project. The pipeline is buried underneath the riverbed of the Intracoastal, basically right to the south of the current bridges, and under the DOT's current plan, it would be to lay the pilings on top of the pipeline. So, we do have the Relocation Act in play on that. 4.5% funding should come from the DOT transportation budget for the relocation of the wet utilities. Nonetheless, there's the potential there for local burden to cover the relocation of the pipeline. The other thing that can be done with it, PSD still has the ability to purchase some additional wholesale water capacity from Beaufort Jasper. So this capital could be put toward that. We also have a suite of wastewater treatment plant upgrades, collection system upgrades. Again, they're projects that benefit the entirety of the system. So the project funding here, it's really a limited millage impact because the way our current debt picture and our ability to wrap this around the current debt. But you see on your screen there what we're at right now with our actual millage and what the estimated would be, putting this debt on. Boils down to about $4, new $4 on $100,000 of assessed value on a primary home. So that's kind of the tax impact that we're looking at. That's really all we had. I didn't want to belabor this stuff with you, but if there's any questions.
Pete, will that go in 25, did you say, the new millage?
Yeah, this would be, assuming the borrowing occurs on the timetable that we're thinking, earliest would be tax bills due in 2025. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, explain to us the $23 million, that's for the bond. You've got, then 10 million coming in a match. So is that then gets you, how does that work? Just so explain that.
So from the bond is how we would cover that local match. And we're in a world, because of the SCIP projects, where, the money was put on the street last summer. We had to do our application, found out in the fall. This all has to be expended under the SCIP program by December of 2026. So we are right now in the throes of our design, our permitting, et cetera, of the projects, leading to bidding the projects early 2025, or 2024, I'm sorry. So with the bids in hand is when we will know, okay, what does the local match actually look like? And we're at, the borrowing is taking us to what we can handle with our debt load, but that is how it will have to play out, is get the bids in hand, see what that local SCIP match is actually going to be based on.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Ms.
There's
Weathers.
some utility in this. If you'll notice in the ordinance, we list the projects that this money can be spent on. And the ordinance is also drafted for a not exceeding $23 million. And the reason why there's perhaps a little bit of mismatch is kind of twofold. One, certainly, as Pete said, everyone, engineers, everyone that we've talked to, professionals, is expecting the estimates to be significantly increased because of the rush in which everyone's got to get these projects done. But the other reason is a little bit of utility there from the Public Service District's professional fees. For instance, my fee and the financial advisor that they will pay. The thought is that they ask for a little bit more money. They go through this process once where we come before you as council, and then they have the approval to spend the bond money on these enumerated projects that are listed in the ordinance. So they may not in 2025 immediately issue $23 million worth of debt. They may issue what they need and then hold a little bit back, look at their millage as debt in the future rolls off. Perhaps they will issue more for some of these projects, but it will not exceed 23 million, and it will only be the projects listed in the ordinance. But it saves them a little bit of money in case in 2 years they realize they need to issue more debt, rather than paying my firm's fees, the financial advisor's fees, to come back before you and do this process all over again.
So what is the length of time then you think the 23 million would cover? What?
I think I wish I could have spoken to the financial advisors, but I would think it would be within 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
They would do that. We wouldn't let it get stale, certainly before they issued all of it.
And I think I understood you say that you're looking at $4 per 100,000. So, a $1 million home would be $40 more per year. $200,000 home would be $8 more per year. That's the kind of numbers we're talking about. Any other questions from anyone on?
Yes, to your point, you can issue bonds up to 23 million. You will have 10 million in hand, and yet you still don't know what the actual cost is going to be, which is why you're hedging your bet it could be significantly, you could use all $33 million. Okay, that's number one. Hank, you may know this. When we were doing the ARPA funding, I believe PSD came before us for the generator for $1 million, correct? Okay.
What we ended up doing with that, we came before you with two projects, one being the generator, one being a new water booster station at our Lego Mutton site. The 1 million quickly became discernible, was gonna be nowhere near to actually perform both those projects. So we pivoted to do the booster station project with the 1 million ARPA allocation, put the RO generator into the skip.
And I'll give you credit for that, because I thought that would have every other PSD come forward, all other 7 in the county, and you're the only ones that came and asked for money, so again, I give you credit for doing that. That was pretty smart.
I have other PowerPoints if you have other funding.
Pete, just one question, on the 10 million skip, you say a local match, do you have to match the entire amount with the additional?
The minimum local match was 15%.
Of
That's the
10 million?
minimum
Oh.
for your grant application. You couldn't send them an application unless you were matching at least 15%. So we were putting in a 42% match that made it highly competitive. We were awarded the full amount that they were able to award.
So how much do you need to match from the millage increase? 42% of 10 million?
The 42% is what would come out if you're looking at the original 17 million estimate of the project.
Got it.
Yes.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to bring this to vote?
So move, sir.
Is there a second?
Second that?
Well, any more discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to us passing this unanimously? I see no objection. This has been approved. All right, so let's move on then to our next item, which is number 9 on our agenda. Recommend approval of a resolution ordering a public hearing to be held on the issuance of not exceeding $23 million aggregate principal amount of general obligation bonds of the Hilton Head Number 1 Public Service District, providing for the publication of the notice of such public hearings and other matters relating hereto. And is there?
So move, sir.
So moved. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? Seeing no discussion, this will be approved without objection. I see no objection. That also has been approved. All right, let's move on then to number 10 on our agenda, and that is the agency boards and commissions, appointments and reappointments. And do we need to read those? Give me a second to get to the right location. And those would be Design Review Board, that is Chris Feldman. Recommendation approval to, also to the Design Review Board is Eric Walsnovich. To the Airports Board, the appointment of James Starnes. Also to the Airports Board, appointment of Rich Sells. And to the Planning Commission, appointment of Eugene Myers. And is there any reason that someone would want to vote on those separately?
No.
No.
All right, do I have a motion then to
I'll make a
accept them?
motion to
All right, is there
accept
a second then?
nominees. Mhm.
Yes, second. We move this to council, or we do this here?
We do this here, well, I know it does go to council for one reading, so this will be moved to council for one reading, so
Second.
I've seen without objection, it has been approved.
I do have a question though
Yep,
regarding
go
this. Who did the interview for these individuals?
I did the one for District 10, which would have been the Planning Commission.
Okay.
I don't know
What
about the others.
Yeah, what about the other 4?
Well, Reeds did the Airports Board.
Okay.
He said he did. How about planning?
I did the planning
did
for
planning.
District 10. There's still a vacancy there, right, Alice?
Right, there's still one more vacancy. Mhm.
Design Review Board was internal.
Internal, okay.
All right, and Sarah, is the website up to date on openings for commissions And again, that's where the public can go look on our website for commissions, and it'll have open seats, and obviously that's where people can apply or contact your county council person to also get application for that, or Ms. Brock. So is there any objection? I didn't see any objection before, so we'll go ahead and pass these committee members. All right. so
Mr.
they-
Chairman, before you go to executive session, I'm terribly disappointed that the chairman of PSD1 did not make any comments here tonight. Is he here?
I think so.
Oh, there he is, Frank Torano. I know you came all the way over here, and you'd love to say something, so would you like an opportunity to do that?
Go into executive session.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your forward thinking. When you look at the project that we're going through right now, it didn't just happen. We foresee a need years ago that water was becoming a problem on Hilton Head. To give you an example, we had 12 wells. We're down to 2. So we have to get water from someplace. And so rather than wait until you had no water, we figured to be proactive. And I have to commend my commission and my general manager for thinking about this. Water is an extremely important resource, and the time kind of evaporates when you're looking to do something. So I want to thank you very much for understanding where we're going, what we're looking to accomplish. And I just want to prepare you that down the road, we're probably going to look to do another reverse osmosis plant, because we're just not going to have enough. So that's what it is, and again, I thank you all for your consideration and your vote.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Toronto.
Frank.
You're
Appreciate that
welcome.
very much. All right, we have a council meeting at 4, so we need to get through this executive session here. So do I have a motion for us to go into executive session?
Move.
Thank you, Ms. Tabrick and Mr. Passman, seconds. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there
Could you just read
any?
them off for the public, Mr.
For
Chairman?
the public.
Yes, let me go ahead and read what we have posted.
Thanks, Pete.
Pursuant to South Carolina Code Section, discussion of employment of a person regulated by county council, Mr. John Robinson. Pursuant to South Carolina Code Section
So
36.
wrong,
Mr. Chairman, that is.
that's not
Whoop,
finance.
wrong one.
It's okay, read finance.
Sorry. Had my wrong. Pursuant to code, discussion of negotiations incident to propose contractual arrangements to Fusky Island Ferry, to receive legal advice covered by attorney-client privilege relating to the appointment of persons to a public body and discussions of the appointments of such persons. Number 13, receive legal advice regarding proposed contractual arrangements and proposed purchase of real property, Cotton Hall. And then we might have actions arising out of those executive sessions. So again, we are now in executive session.
Fort Fremont closes out a 350-year legacy of coastal fortifications in Port Royal Sound, beginning in the mid-16th century. It also represents the closing chapter of America's coastal defense system before the dawn of air power. Fort Fremont is an example of the most advanced military technology of its time. It would parallel the B-17, an aircraft carrier of World War II, the F-35 of today. Fort Fremont was an important part of the Beaufort culture, very similar to Parris Island and the Marine Corps Air Base today.
In 1525, the Spaniards named this sound and this harbor Santa Elena. They called the navigational point La Punta de Santa Elena, the point of Santa Elena. And what the Spanish explorers discovered is that Port Royal Sound is a unique piece of geography. It's the deepest natural harbor south of the Chesapeake Bay, possibly south of New York. The channel into Port Royal Sound, this I find a remarkable geological fact. The channel has not changed for 500 years. There's no inlet on the southern coast that hasn't shifted entirely in 500 years, except Port Royal Sound. There's something geologically different, or one might say magical, about Port Royal Sound. So Spanish sailors, being the best in the world in their time, found this place very early, knew that for the Spanish explorations of the American Southeast, this would be the entrada, the entrance. And so they built a city across the river, across the sound from where we are on Parris Island. It became the first capital of Florida. And they explored the backcountry from this location for more than a century with the object of building a highway from this magnificent harbor to Mexico City. So the Sound was known to the Spaniards. It was known to the French, who actually got here first and created the first Protestant colony in the New World on Parris Island over my shoulder. And that colony was a failure. The Spaniards replaced them. It was part of Spanish Florida when the English arrived 150 years later. And this became, as a consequence, a battleground in the 18th century between Spanish interests in Florida and St. Augustine and the English colony in Carolina and in Charleston. And back and forth these wars went, many of them naval wars, many of them employing, as all the sailors knew by then, the magic of Port Royal Sound. When the Civil War came, Confederates defended the harbor, but it was basically indefensible against large naval forces. So the U.S. Navy made it their principal target during the beginning of the Civil War and sent the largest flotilla of ships assembled by the United States Navy in the 19th century into Port Royal Sound on November 7th, 1861. In a 4-hour cannonade, which would have been deafening from where we're sitting, was heard for miles from Savannah nearly to Charleston. It was called the Day of the Big Gun Shoot. During the Civil War, this harbor that we're looking at was filled with ships. There would be hundreds of ships in this harbor. There was a 1,000-foot dock with a railroad on top off of Hilton Head. The military installation was mammoth. There were 13,000 U.S. soldiers on Hilton Head, which we're looking at. The largest population on Hilton Head until 1974. So this was a major U.S. government installation in the heart of the South. It was the headquarters of the U.S. Army Department of the South, but more importantly, it was the headquarters of the United States Navy South Atlantic Blockading Squadron. So the biggest ships in the Navy were here. And so it became, and that's really where the story of Fort Fremont starts, with that huge Civil War military operations and installations on Hilton Head, on St. Helena Island, on Parris Island, and in Beaufort.
After the Civil War, we're going to see a massive change in technology that's going to revolutionize the military. During the Civil War, we had ironclad ships, we had rifle cannons, but they were all made out of iron, and they were not terribly effective. But its technology is going to change after the Civil War. We're going to see steel produced, and steel is much harder. So now we have a new material to make armor out of for ships. So we can have these armored ships made with steel that are much more resistant to shot. Because I have steel, I can make stronger barrels for my guns. I can rifle and machine these much better, and the rifling is the spirals that are cut in the barrel that allows it to shoot further with more accuracy. And we can also now have breech loading guns that can lock from behind, so I can load my gun from behind. I don't have to go have the old black powder muzzle loading cannon I had before. Now I can fire much more rapidly. If I compare the gun of 1890 to the guns of 1860, for the same caliber, the same diameter gun, the 1890 gun will be able to fire a projectile that's 4 times heavier, can shoot it 3 times further, can put it in with greater precision, and can put it through much more armor than anything we had in 1860. It's a world difference. A military historian, E.R. Lewis, would say that the change between the Civil War and 1890 in artillery technology was the greatest that would be seen since the invention of artillery in the 14th century to the introduction of the nuclear projectile in the 1950s. So there's been a huge change in gun technology. At the same time, it's not just the steel, but also the powder that fires these guns is different. We have new chemical makeup, and sort of like cordite is invented now, and it's still a widely used military explosive even today. Smokeless powder is invented during this period of time. And it's not just chemical composition, but it's the details of how you make the grain, how fast they burn. So much like the skill of firing a solid rocket, solid fuel rocket, it's that same kind of technology that's been developed in these gunpowder and this new powder. So our weapons of this day are much, much greater. They would be the great killing machines of World War I. Most of the casualties on the battlefields of World War I would come from artillery. So the world has seen a huge change in artillery, and that's tied into changes in ships. We now have steel armored ships. They're all steam powered. They are now equipped with these fine long-range guns, and they now become the dominant threat of the late 19th, early 20th century. This is the threat. The French and the English would bombard cities like Cairo and reduce them to rubble because they were unable to defend them. So this is how the world was seeing the threat from this new technology. Big battleships are the threat of the era, and new guns and fortifications on the ground are what you have to defend against them.
One of the most important and first things that happened after the Civil War is they built a railroad to Port Royal Sound, which didn't exist. It was the first connection of the Sea Islands to the mainland. And the advantage of that railroad is it brought coal to Port Royal Sound. So when the coal was delivered, the Navy followed.
In 1872, Robert Smalls was in the South Carolina legislature, and he pushed through a resolution to the Secretary of War calling for them to put a Navy station on Parris Island. And eventually he would go on to Congress, where he would continue his support for a Navy station here in the Beaufort-Port Royal area. They eventually opened a Navy station here and a coaling station.
They created in the 1890s on Parris Island the largest dry dock in the United States. This is the period when the U.S. Navy was switching from sail to steam. All the navies of the world needed a coaling station. This was the principal coaling station, because of the railroad, for the Caribbean and South American U.S. fleets.
This would be the biggest dry dock south of Norfolk. In fact, it is the only dry dock south of Norfolk, Virginia, that's capable of taking these new modern battleships and these new modern armored cruisers. So this becomes, at this point, a strategic Navy base in that it provides coal, and it provides top-line support to the ships, and they can repair the hulls of even the biggest ships in the U.S. Navy. Following the Civil War, national strategy and emphasis in the United States shifted to recovery from war, and all of our coastal fortifications went into neglect. The military was busy taming the West, and coastal defenses became something that was no longer important. In the rest of the world, technology is moving forward, and they're developing these battleships, they're developing new high-quality artillery, and this is going on worldwide. And in 1885, President Grover Cleveland appointed the Endicott Board. This was headed by Secretary of War Endicott, William Endicott, and the board would meet and issue a report in 1886, and they said the conditions of our coastal defenses were just unbearable. They cannot be allowed to stay like that. And they made recommendations for fortification and improvements. They identified 29 places that needed fortifications, and 11 of which were critical. In that list of 29, Savannah and Charleston are on the list, but Beaufort is not on the list. It'll take international events to bring Beaufort into the play of modern fort technology.
So the USS Maine was here on patrol and in the harbor, and while they were in the harbor several times, they entertained the local population. So the merchants and the social leaders and the political leaders of Beaufort were invited to come have lunch with the captain of the ship, Captain Sigsbee. And the officers got to know the people got to know the officers. The crew, which was large, would go ashore on payday and make friends with everybody in town. So it was a very social arrangement between the towns, Port Royal and Beaufort, and the ship. So the Maine left here, it went and reprovisioned, it refueled in Key West, and then went the 90 miles across to Havana into the harbor and blew up.
This inflamed the already hot passions both in Cuba and here in the United States. At that point, somebody in the War Department realized that we had this big dry dock, the only dry dock in the South that could take on and repair these big capital ships that were in our Navy. We were going to start operations against a power in the Caribbean, and this fort was totally undefended. And that's what put Fort Fremont on the map. We had to have a fort here to defend the coaling station and especially this big dry dock, as well as this fine harbor that's here.
And of course, that event, which killed 300 or more sailors on the ship, was very much followed by the local news media and very much lamented by the many friends that the crew had made here. The destruction of the USS Maine was a personal matter to Beaufort and to Port Royal Sound. And of course, it was the Spanish-American War and the attempt to defend this harbor again, which led to the creation of Fort Fremont. The United States declared war on Spain in April 1898.
And by early May, we had temporary batteries in place here, submarine mines were in place, and in the summer they would actually place the mines across the Beaufort River behind me. The temporary batteries were a temporary expedient. They were located to my left about 1,000 yards. They immediately began construction of what would become Fort Fremont. The large batteries would house the large guns. Battery 4 Nance, the rapid-fire guns, the smaller battery, was completed by June of 1898.
In 1898, everybody in town went to war. They had a naval militia unit, South Carolina Naval Militia Unit, and they were absorbed by the Navy. Many of them ran tugboats from here to New York to Key West, which was the principal support base, Tampa and Key West, for the U.S. Army operations in Cuba.
Peace was declared by the end of 1898, and the remainder of Fort Fremont would not be finished until early 1899, and the first soldiers would arrive from the regular Army at that point in March 1899.
Well, Fort Fremont was named for Major General John Fremont. He was actually a local boy, so to speak. He was born and grew up in Savannah, Georgia, just south of us, and went to college in the College of Charleston, up just north of us in Charleston. He served in the Army, and primarily initially as a explorer, as Army forts were generally named for Army officers, and he was connected locally. This was more than likely why the fort was named for him.
The fort was constructed on a site directly across the river from the Parris Island Naval Station. And the site selected was 170 acres, which included the two artillery batteries. Fort Fremont, of course, had Battery Fornes and Battery Jessup. But then adjacent to the battery site was an administrative quadrangle, a very typical military-type administrative square.
We are sitting in the number 3 gun position of a 3-gun battery, Battery Jessup, which had 3 10-inch disappearing carriage, large caliber guns, breech-loading guns. Their purpose was to engage the warships that might be entering the harbor and Port Royal Sound. We're here now at the 2nd battery that was part of Fort Fremont. This is Battery 4 Nance, was named for Army officer that was actually killed during the Spanish-American War during the Battle of San Juan Hill. Battery 4 Nance mounted 2 British-made 4.72-inch Armstrong quick-fire guns. They were called quick-fire because they were loaded with a complete cartridge, and in time of action they could fire 4 to 6 rounds per minute. The purpose of Battery 4 Nance was to defend the minefield, which was the other component of the Endicott Coast Artillery or Coast Defense System. A minefield with controlled mines, controlled meaning that they were connected electrically to shore and could be fired on command from shore. That control station would have been probably shared with the plotting room. And in order to protect the minefield, obviously an enemy would want to interfere with that, might send vessels, small ships in here at night to try to interfere. And this battery would take those vessels under fire if there was there was suspected that they were doing something to interfere with the mines, such as pulling up the cables and cutting those.
The Endicott era fort was a formidable technology. It represented state-of-the-art technology, defense technology of its time against the state-of-the-art threat, which would be the battleship.
The life for the soldiers at Fort Fremont was disciplined and regimented. They even had meal times were specified lengths of time, 15 minutes for lunch, 15 minutes at breakfast, 20 minutes at supper. They had to practice their skills. They were training and doing maintenance constantly. If you can imagine, with these big guns, they had to have skills and practice the skills in artillery, mine laying, signaling, which involved, in our case at Fort Fremont, the use of the fire control tower, which was a pretty sophisticated and advanced signaling technique. Then they also had to practice the typical military skills, marching and drilling, small arms fire, first aid, and so forth. In addition to that, they also had participated in athletics. They had physical training, PT, and they also had sports teams. So this was to keep them physically fit so that they could continue their duties, because it was pretty rigorous at Fort Fremont.
When eventually the decision was made to move the dry dock and the coaling station and the Navy station up to Charleston, then this fort no longer became significant. There was nothing left here that was to be protected. And at that point, 1911, the last troops were transferred out and the fort was closed.
In 1901, the mayor of Charleston and the United States Senator Pitchfork Ben Tillman from South Carolina wanted this to move from Beaufort County to Charleston County, because there are more votes in Charleston County, and the mayor wanted the U.S. Corps of Engineers and the Navy to dredge the harbor in Charleston, because battleships in those days required 26 feet of water. Charleston's natural harbor is 15 feet of water. Port Royal is 30 feet of water. In order for Charleston to sustain its port, its commercial port, it had to dredge the harbor. Well, if they could get the Navy up there, they get the Corps of Engineers to dredge the harbor. That was the play. And the play for Pitchfork Ben Tillman, the U.S. Senator in 1900, was that he'd get a whole lot more votes from the largest city in South Carolina. So it was a political, commercial operation, and they moved the nation, and it was done, boom, like that.
The fort did its job. It was a deterrent for anybody that wished to attack these. It provided protection. In fact, the whole Endicott system, although never challenged in this era here in the United States, provided some 300 major guns, coastal guns, to protect major areas, and left the United States at the beginning of the 20th century with as well-defended coastline as any place in the world.
But I would just like to say that it's a magnificent artifact of an era. And it's an era that has been neglected. The turn of the 20th century, the naval station across the river here. And so it's a piece of history that's disappearing, and the Friends of Fort Fremont and Beaufort County have preserved it for the use of the public and as a memorial to that moment in history.
Fort Fremont closes a 350-year story of homeland security addressing European imperialism in the 19th century. It's a tale of how geography, technology, and national security creates a transition for America to become a global power. It's also a wonderful snapshot of America in the beginning of the 20th century. The Friends of Fort Fremont and Beaufort County have a valued partnership working in tandem to preserve the fort's integrity, and promote the historical, natural, and cultural aspects of the fort. Most important, we are always looking for creative ways to enhance the visitor experience.
It's civilization versus nature's fury. Raging blizzards bury cities under thousands of tons of snow. Howling hurricanes tear apart coastal communities with wind and rain. And flash floods wipe entire towns off the face of the earth. As the skies clear, people begin to pick up the pieces. But after the storm, insidious damage is still being done. Our most vital natural resource is under assault, our nation's waters.
We're at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, and we're trying to find out what a watershed is. First victim. I need you to tell me what a watershed is. Do you have any idea?
Watershed?
A watershed? Where people go to the bathroom?
Sweating, I guess.
Something to do with sweating?
Uh-huh.
Like after you run, when
You perspire, yeah.
and then you shed it?
Uh-huh.
We wanted to ask you if you knew what a watershed was.
A watershed?
Yeah.
Is it kind of like the rain?
Do you know what a watershed is?
A shed that holds water.
Come here for a second. I want to ask you something. Do you know what a watershed is?
No. No.
Do you have any idea? What do you think it has something to do with?
I don't know.
What a watershed is?
Yeah.
That's just a drain pool, I guess you'd say, or the drain area. That's where the rainwater drains into the river.
Correct. That's a great answer.
A watershed is that area of land that drains to a body of water, be that if it's a river, a stream, the ocean, an estuary, a bay. Wherever you live drains to some water body, and you live in a watershed. So everyone lives in a watershed.
And in this modern industrial age, our water sources are becoming more contaminated with each passing year.
The biggest water quality problem that we have in the nation today is polluted runoff.
All water east of the Continental Divide drains to the Atlantic, while water west of the divide flows to the Pacific. And one drop of rain can cross many different watersheds along the way. As runoff flows into rivers, streams, and storm drains, the water picks up trash, dirt, bacteria, toxic chemicals, and fertilizers, creating a soup of pollutants that is extremely hazardous to the environment. And the consequences of polluted runoff exist worldwide.
The UN estimate is that there's about 1 billion people on the planet right now who don't have adequate access to fresh water.
97% of all water on Earth is salty ocean water. Of the remaining 3% that's fresh, over 2/3 is frozen in glaciers and polar ice. That leaves less than 1% of all the planet's water for our use.
I predict in the future that some of the U.S. water needs are going to come through pipeline because we have just overused our supply.
To address the complex threats facing U.S. water resources, the Environmental Protection Agency recommends adopting a watershed approach.
We're trying to reconnect some of the river.
It's a method that looks at each watershed for its own unique set of environmental challenges and solutions.
In many cases, people mistakenly identify large discharge pipes in the water as the problem. But that may not be the problem. It may be coming from agricultural runoff. It may be coming from stormwater runoff over parking lots and impervious surfaces. Every watershed is different, and you need to look at each watershed in its own terms and then think systematically about how you remediate, how you clean up that watershed.
In California, the Santa Monica Bay watershed drains a dangerous amount of polluted runoff after each storm.
When it rains, literally the whole residue of urban living ends up getting washed into the storm drain system and ends up going straight into the bay on Santa Monica Bay's beaches with no treatment whatsoever.
It's actually like a giant toilet flushing because all of the pollution, the dog mess has been building up and building up and building up. When it rains, it just flushes into the storm drain and goes directly into the surf.
In 1996, the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission proved there was a link between the contaminated runoff in the Santa Monica Bay and reports of illness afflicting people who swim there.
What we did find was at the outlets of storm drains, no matter where they were up and down the bay, if there was a flow of runoff into the surf zone, those people that were swimming in those areas definitely experienced higher incidences of illnesses.
The pollutants in the water affect surfers because we're actually the indicator species with all the pollutants. When we are in the waters, we're ingesting it through our skin and our mouth. Even if people don't take a swallow of water, it's still getting into our systems, our ears, any orifice on your body. And it causes infections, it can cause colds, sore throats at the very least.
I wouldn't want to swim in water that's got those diseases in there, just floating around, making more diseases.
I've seen it pretty much as bad as it can be. I've seen crap floating out in the water, literally.
Generically, we call it fecal coliform. More specifically, you might know of it as E. coli, salmonella, or enterococcus. Whatever's in poop.
There's times when it tastes funky, for sure.
Every day, the city and county of Los Angeles perform a battery of tests to keep the public informed about water quality in the Santa Monica Bay. Cesar Arzadan begins the monitoring process each morning by taking a series of coastline water samples. Then it's back to the lab for analysis.
Most of the bacteria that you're going to see, it comes from feces. And when you put it under the UV light, you're going to see a different kind of color. It's a fluorescent sign that there is a bacteria, and that one is called E. coli. That one definitely is feces from animals, or it could be humans also.
The results are reported to the health department, and beach warnings are posted as necessary.
The number of beach postings has decreased, and 85% of the beaches that have been monitored in California have received either A or B grades, and that's significantly different than 4 years ago.
But while progress is being made in California, the harmful effects of polluted runoff are a growing concern everywhere. So what can the average person do to help reduce pollution in our watersheds?
How you apply pesticides or not in your garden, how you wash your cars, making sure that you don't throw cigarette butts out onto the street.
Do not dump things on the ground, especially oils or any chemical pollutants. Pick up after your dogs. A lot of people don't realize how important that is. And just be a conscientious citizen and don't leave anything on the ground.
I think one person can make a difference, and needs to make the difference. If not you, who?
Coming up.
We're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
Can the Gulf of Mexico be saved from polluted runoff? It was a flood of apocalyptic scale. 26,000 square miles of the lower Mississippi Valley inundated by water. More than 200 lives lost, and 600,000 people displaced from their homes. The flood of 1927 was the most disastrous in U.S. history, and its effects are still felt today. After the flood of 27, massive levees were put in place. And while they helped protect the lower Mississippi River basin from flooding, the levees and other human activities would ultimately harm the watershed in unforeseen ways. The Gulf state of Louisiana is the terminus of the Mississippi River. the mighty watershed that drains 41% of the area of the lower 48 states into the Gulf of Mexico.
We receive water from as far away as Montana, Michigan, to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa. All those waters drain right past this area right here.
But by the time all that water enters the Gulf, it has accumulated enough contaminants from polluted runoff to create an enormous hypoxic zone, an area of water lacking in vital oxygen.
The size of the low oxygen zone in the Gulf of Mexico is about 9,000 square miles. That's equal to the size of the state of New Jersey.
The shortage of oxygen is killing fish and other sea life and could potentially have a devastating effect on the regional economy.
We are the largest navigation port in the United States. We are the second largest in the world. We have the largest fishery in this country.
When we was crabbing, a lot of times all our crabs we dead and we can't even sell them.
The reason hypoxia should be of concern to most citizens in this nation is because it's a sign. It's a sign of the degradation of our water resources.
We're heading for what's known as an ecosystem collapse.
If you're going to have an ecological disaster caused by the offshore hypoxic areas, then that absolutely translates into an economic disaster.
So what exactly is causing this dead zone in the Gulf? Hypoxia develops when an area of water receives excess pollutants, primarily an overabundance of nutrients, which produce large algae blooms that die off and lead to low oxygen. And since the Mississippi gets fed by tributaries that flow through 31 states, that adds up to a staggering volume of contaminated runoff.
You have drainage into the Gulf of Mexico from the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, and the Missouri River. Yet each of those three major river systems are watersheds in and of themselves with their own challenges and their own problems.
The Mississippi River has always delivered a lot of water, and that hasn't changed over the centuries. What's changed is the amount of nutrients in that water.
In fact, the Mississippi's nitrogen levels in the lower Mississippi River have tripled since the 1950s, and the growing hypoxic zone off the Louisiana coast contains the disturbing evidence.
It's like a rusty color, stinky, rotten looking. You see fish just swimming sideways, gasping for air and stuff like that. And when you pull up the nets, not one shrimp alive, all dead, orange. The fish, they rotten, like melting away and stuff like that. Can't breathe stuff, and it's just rotten.
This is just a fact of life, the way we treat our water systems, because we use them as our garbage dumps. We use them to dilute our pollutants and things like that, and it flows downstream. I believe the statistic is that if you're in New Orleans, the water that is going by you has passed through a human gut something like 3 or 4 times before it gets to you.
Incredibly, Louisiana boasts a natural resource that removes pollutants from the draining Mississippi, the once abundant wetlands.
Plants that grow in wetlands produce these wonderful filters for everything that is coming into them. They trap sediment, they tempt chemicals, and what leaves the wetlands is much, much cleaner water.
Wetlands also provide an important habitat for birds and other wildlife. Sadly, the Louisiana wetlands are quickly disappearing.
Coastal Louisiana has lost about 1.2 million acres of wetlands in the last 100 years.
When we levied off the Mississippi, it cut off the Mississippi River water from the marshes.
In addition to the levees, a network of man-made navigation channels is also compromising the wetlands by allowing salt water to seep into the marshes.
Once that salt water travels up these channels and overflows the banks of these channels out into freshwater systems, such as this cypress swamp, that salt water sits out there around the roots of these trees and kills them. They cannot survive salt water. They're freshwater plants.
Eliminating the hypoxic zone will take more than saving our wetlands. Reducing nutrient runoff in the Mississippi River watershed is the heart of the problem. It's an issue involving over half the states in the nation and a vast array of industries, particularly farming, which uses nitrogen-rich fertilizer to grow its crops.
Fertilizers are helping the United States produce the food for the world, but there is such a thing as overuse.
There are scientists who have done the analyses, and predict that you could reduce fertilizers by about 12% without reducing crop production and see a significant decrease in the amount of nitrogen going into the Mississippi River.
Experts say the first key to changing behavior is raising public awareness.
We all live downstream of somebody, and we all live upstream of somebody. So what somebody else does in their watershed affects the water that I receive, and what I do in my watershed affects the water that somebody else receives downstream.
If we don't clean up our act, our water resources, which we simply cannot live without, will be ruined. Coming up, can the water supply for 9 million New Yorkers be saved from the ravages of polluted runoff? In January of 1996, one of the most devastating winter storms in history slams the East Coast. 2 feet of snow dumps on New York and throughout the Northeast Corridor. Schools, airports, and roads are shut down. By the time it's over, the blizzard and resultant flooding caused $3 billion in losses, and 187 lives are taken. And in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, the snowmelt triggers another potentially devastating crisis. Stormwater runoff contaminated with trash, dirt, fertilizers, and pesticides from nearby farms and communities threatens the fresh water supply. And the Catskill system of reservoirs is vitally important, for it is the biggest watershed of New York City, providing drinking water to over 9 million people.
The miracle of the city's water supply system is largely unknown to most New Yorkers. You ask people, where does the water come from? Often people shrug their shoulders and say New Jersey.
I figured that we were probably our own separate water system than from upstate. I'd rather be drinking water from upstate than the Hudson River.
I don't know that most people are aware of how large the problem is and how close to crisis many of our water supply systems are.
To preserve the purity of the reservoirs and enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Environmental Protection Agency presented the Big Apple with 2 options. Either build and maintain a $6 billion facility to filter all of the city's tap water, or fund a $1 billion program to protect the watershed from polluted runoff.
When it comes to our investment in clean air and clean water, preserving open space, fixing antiquated sewage treatment plants, we can't wait. It doesn't get any less expensive, it gets more expensive.
With the historic Watershed Agreement of 1997, an unprecedented upstate-downstate partnership was forged to protect the New York City water supply.
The Watershed Agreement is saving New York City billions of dollars.
The plan includes purchasing and preserving 355,000 acres of undeveloped watershed land, the upgrading of sewage treatment plants, and the protection and restoration of stream corridors.
What we're looking at here is a main tributary of the Esopus Creek. During flooding, we were seeing a lot of sediment coming out of the stream. The clay gets into the water column and it becomes very turbid, and then it makes it very difficult to treat and clean that water. So from a water quality perspective, we're very concerned about erosion.
The program also provides funding for farmers that implement agriculture management practices.
Well, we have a very exciting program with the Watershed Agricultural Council where we are working with local farmers. We look at how they're handling the animals so that the runoff associated with manure, fertilizer, and that farm activity isn't getting into the streams around our reservoirs.
This water here is basically the water you're going to be drinking down in the city. And I feel I've got a responsibility to try my best to keep it clean for when it gets down there. It used to be when it rained here on the farm, the water that ran away from the back of the barn here was full of mud, manure, and it would just run brown and right into the stream. 2 years ago, we would spread every day. We'd have to take it out, spread it on the fields. If the snow was deep, we spread it on the snow, and unfortunately, if the ground was froze when the snow melted, the nutrient value of it for fertilizer was gone. It wound up down in the reservoir.
With New York City funding, a secure above-ground steel tank that can hold 400,000 gallons of manure was installed on the Meadowbrook farm.
That's enough storage for 6 months of the year. Now we can store it, spread it when it'll do the most good to us for fertilizer, and we don't have to spread it every day.
I worked with Tim on the plan to develop the improvements we're going to make. Plan really belongs to the farmer. And it's a collaboration of their ideas and what technical advice we can bring to the program. But the farmer makes the decision.
It's a program that seems to make everybody happy.
Here's to the farmers who are working so hard to make sure we've got clean water to put in our coffee.
To guarantee the city's water supply is fresh at the tap, comprehensive tests are performed by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, both in the lab and at over 1,000 sampling stations throughout the city.
New York City has probably one of the most extensive water quality monitoring programs in the nation, if not the world.
We're sampling every day, 365 days a year. I've been drinking this water for 53 years. Nothing else. Best water in the world. New York City, straight from the tap to my lips.
Coming up, the future of our water supply remains at risk, but there's something everyone can do to help protect it. Find out how next. To keep our watersheds free of pollutants will require the actions of every citizen, community, and business.
Paved concrete surfaces, asphalt, parking lots, sidewalks. The question is, do we need to have as many as we do? Because to the extent that you have too much impervious surface, the water is not retained on site. It doesn't soak into the ground. It runs off, picks up speed, carries pollutants and contaminants into the water body.
One strategy for preventing stormwater runoff is occurring at the new Ford Rouge Center in Dearborn, Michigan. This remodeled truck plant is covered by a green roof the size of 8 football fields. Planted with a porous ground cover, it reduces the amount of polluted runoff released into the watershed.
The thing that tends to get the most attention is the 10-acre green roof, but that's really just part of a philosophy that if an area does not have to be paved or built upon, it's going to be green space.
And communities are also implementing green space strategies, such as rain gardens.
They sloped the lot in such a manner that all the flow goes towards this landscaping, where basically the polluted runoff can percolate into the ground and get filtered rather than going straight onto the street into the storm drain system, and really a very simple approach to cleaning up our runoff in urban areas.
But perhaps the most powerful course of action is individual participation.
People need to take responsibility for the state of our waters, and water conservation is one area where they can do that as a committed citizen. All those things your mom told you, take a short shower, don't let the water tap run while you're brushing your teeth.
Taking your household hazardous waste to a cleanup and recycling day. Don't wash your car on the streets and put all those suds down into the drain.
When you change your used motor oil, you don't dump it into the street. Everybody's got to clean up after their pets. Obviously, that's a big concern. Fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, make sure you don't use them anytime there's any chance of rain coming up in the near future. When you're irrigating your lawn and your garden, make sure that you're not overspraying and causing all those chemicals to end up getting into the storm drain system. The only way we're going to solve the problem is if everybody does their part.
We all live in a watershed. We all have an impact on our environment. And we must all play a role in the protection and restoration of our valuable water resources. To learn more about how you can get involved and to get a free brochure called After the Storm, visit epa.gov/Weather Channel.
Dr. Gates, tell me a little bit about the timeliness of the Reconstruction series. Why now?
12 years of black freedom, followed by an alt-right rollback. A president immediately following Abraham Lincoln who refused to renounce white supremacy. A conservative Supreme Court that effectively undid the power of the 14th and 15th Amendments. What's that sound like?
Contemporary times.
Contemporary times. So it was obvious that we could teach our fellow citizens in America about the perilous moment in which we're living by analogy through telling the story of Reconstruction and its rollback. And I first started thinking about it after the horrible murders of Reverend Clementa Pinckney and the other innocents at Mother Emanuel Church. Because the justifications that Dylann Roof summoned for his actions were very reminiscent of racist rhetoric about black people immediately following the Civil War and following Reconstruction. And I was shocked. It's almost like a horror movie when you think that the vampire's dead, and all of a sudden they come up out of the casket, and you think, damn, I thought I put a stake in your heart. I thought that the worst and most pernicious, heinous aspects of anti-black white supremacy were long gone, and I was naive about that. And we've seen a rise in hate speech, anti-Semitism, anti-gay attitudes, and when people become frightened, particularly about their economic future, they look for scapegoats. And the scapegoats traditionally have been Jewish people, women, gay people, and of course in this country, people of color. So it's a moral, a lesson. Let's don't go back to what happened with the rollback to Reconstruction.
Reconstruction is such an important part of American history, and yet it is so misunderstood. Why is that? Why is it that we don't have a better understanding of this period and what it actually meant?
Well, W.E. Du Bois wrote a book in 1935 called Black Reconstruction. And one chapter is called The Propaganda of History. And he analyzes how white historians had written about Reconstruction. And that was part of the rollback, to create a mythology of black incompetence, that black men had been elected to office and couldn't properly serve, that black voters had been manipulated by northern scallywags and carpetbaggers, that basically they were tools and pawns, that they were dishonest. Robert Smalls, who was one of the greatest heroes of the Civil War and Reconstruction, served 5 non-consecutive terms in Congress because he was constantly being accused yet of stealing money and misappropriating funds. There was a mythology sanctioned by the discipline of history located at Columbia University called the Dunning School, led by historian Professor Dunning. And they found every way to traduce the achievements of black people. And that has only been undone by historians since Du Bois published Black Reconstruction, and most notably under the leadership of another Columbia professor, Professor Eric Foner, with whom we made our Reconstruction series. He was our chief consultant. Plus, we have over 40 historians doing modern cutting-edge scholarship on Reconstruction, whom we feature in the series. So it's very much a collective series, and it's very much a counterpoint to the received interpretations of Reconstruction fabricated by the Dunning School.
Well, for us,
this is the Foner School.
The Foner School. For us in South Carolina, it has a very special meaning. Why is the state of South Carolina so pivotal to an understanding of Reconstruction?
South Carolina was ground zero for Reconstruction because it was a majority black state. There's a famous 1872 lithograph of the first colored senator and the members of the House of Representatives, and 3 of those men in that lithograph were from South Carolina. When Richard T. Greener graduated from Harvard, the first black man to graduate from Harvard in the class of 1870, where was the land of opportunity? Was it in New York? Was it in Boston? Was it in Philadelphia? Charleston. Came to Charleston and went to Columbia and served on the faculty and took law classes there. A black man from England, from Liverpool, England, Robert Brown Elliott, came to Boston in 1867 with the British Navy, could smell the opportunity, headed straight to South Carolina and worked for Richard Harvey Kane's newspaper, then was elected to Congress. Very eloquent man. And this was where it was at. This is where it was happening. And when I interviewed Representative Clyburn, his office in the Congress.
Well, he's long been a student of Reconstruction.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a museum. You go in there and all these brothers are on the wall. And we talked about the fact that South Carolina had a black majority in the House of Representatives. You can't imagine that now. South Carolina, even in the 18th century, was called Negro country. It was a black state. And very soon that was dismantled. So it's no surprise that many of the most vicious battles over race occurred here, because it was an attempt to control this black majority. I went to Calhoun College at Yale University.
executive session. Before I do that, is there anyone that wants to make any type of action from our items in executive session? No. Seeing none, the one item that we did have that we do want to talk about is about Cotton Hall. I'll try to, Mr. Ward, if you want to come forward, I'm going to try to real quick explain what I heard and what I understand is that the Cotton Hall purchase, we approved $4.5 million for that purchase. We are actually going to spend $4,449,000 for the purchase, so it's $51,000 less than what we approved. However, we were expecting to get $1.5 million from the South Carolina Conservation Bank grant funds.
Correct.
But we're only getting $1 million instead.
Correct.
So again, we just want to clear up and make sure that everyone understands exactly what is going on with this. So again, being transparent, we still want the transaction to occur. So again, that's why there's no action coming out of that committee meeting. But go ahead, if you want to make sure that I've said that correctly.
I think you're accurate in what you just stated. Yes, we are receiving $1 million from the South Carolina Conservation Bank grant funds, opposed to the 1.5, which we originally had stated we would be receiving.
And our amount that we're expending is still less than the 4.5 that we approved.
Yes, we are still within the 4.5 that was originally.
All right, seeing no additional action, our meeting is adjourned. And Chairman, how much time do we need? What time do you want to start?